Please join me in giving Congressman Dr. Roger Marshall a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, glad to be here. All right, good afternoon, Pachyderm members. It's great to be back here. Let me start by thanking Dalton for praying for me. Really had no idea what I was going to run into, and I went to Washington, D.C., but I want you to know that there are most all the people there are godly men and women, that we open every morning at the House of Representatives with a prayer and a pledge salute. When the Republican caucus meets, we start that meeting with a prayer and a pledge salute. When we start the Ag Committee, we start that meeting with a prayer and a flag salute. So greatly appreciate the prayers. I remember meeting Vice President Pence for the first time, and I said, Vice President Pence, nice to meet you. I'm Roger Marshall from Kansas. And I want you to know that all my people back home are praying for you and the President. And his response was very genuine. Tell your people back in Kansas I can feel their prayers, that they're working and that we appreciate them. And I truly do feel and sense the prayers of my home state. And then people ask me what to pray about, of course, for wisdom and discernment. But pray for our families. Don't forget our families. They're the ones that are back here dealing with some of the crazies, and it's great to walk in here and see that it sounds like we caught the bomber already. The president, one more thing, when the president says something, he tends to get to it, and he promised yesterday we would find the bomber. We were hot on the trail, and it sounds like they have the person in jail now, and hopefully there's just one of them. So that's great news. We're not going to let the crazies ruin our democracy or keep us from doing what we need to do. I ran for Congress 2 years ago, left my practice in obstetrics and gynecology. I promised the people of Kansas that number one is I would give Kansas a voice back on the House Agriculture Committee and write a strong farm bill. And we've done just that. And I'll come back and maybe talk a little bit more about that. Number two is I promised to make our country more secure, fully fund our military, and take care of our veterans, and I feel like we've done just that. And then lastly, I said I wanted to get this economy going again, and I think by any objective measure, this economy is exponentially better today than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And the best example I can give, and I've used it before, is I drove through Wichita a couple weeks ago on my way to the airport, and I saw 4 of the big skyscraper cranes working across the city. I've never seen more than 2 before. Our visits out to Spirit and see what's going on out there. They have 1,000 jobs open right now, and the rest of the aerospace industry growing as well. 3% unemployment across the state now, 4% GDP. Wages are up on average about 5% now, it looks like. And the consumer price index has only went up 0.1%. Added 4 million jobs to the economy. Again, I think no one can argue that the economy is much better today than it was 2 years ago. If I could go back to the Farm Bill for a second and maybe just kind of put a couple exclamation marks on what we have done. The House has written a strong Farm Bill. The Senate has written a Farm Bill. It's been incredible to work with Senator Roberts, a good friend, a great mentor to me. People sometimes think of this as a zero-sum, winner-take-all game, but that's not the objective. The objective is to take the best parts of my Farm Bill, of our Farm Bill on the House side, and the best part of Senator Roberts' Farm Bill as well. And there's things I like better in his, and there's things I like better in ours. What I've invested a lot of my time is on the nutrition part of the Farm Bill. SNAP and the nutrition component takes up about 80% of the Farm Bill. And I always felt it was my job to make sure whatever monies we're spending to help people are spent as efficiently as possible. We've been to probably most every senior center in my district. Of course, the school lunches, the food banks, all those things that are important and that work so well, I've tried to accentuate. So this particular Farm Bill has a little bit more money for food stamps. It continues to make it easier for senior citizens to get access to food assistance. And believe it or not, we have some military personnel that we're still not paying enough that maybe has 2 or 3 kids that we're making it easier for them to get some food assistance as well. But what I'm really proud of is our work training requirement in our particular Farm Bill, and that's what's creating all the controversy. If I would tell you that there's 9 million Americans between the ages of 18 and 59 without a disability that reported zero income last year that are on food stamps. I think most of us would say something's wrong there. So 9 million people between the ages of 18 and 59 without a disability in this country are getting food stamps and reported zero income. So what we're trying to do is give people a hand up rather than just a handout. All our bill requires is if you're in that window of people I talked about and you don't have a young child under the age of 6 at home, as you would work or train to work for 20 hours a week, you can volunteer. If you can't find training, we'll help set up the training. And in a state like Kansas with unemployment under 3%, if you can't find a job, I want to make sure that you have the skills necessary to do that. We have incredible community colleges, technical colleges. Your Wichita Technical College, which is part of a Wichita State, one of the finest institutions in the country for doing what they do. Again, our aerospace industry today, more people retiring every day than coming into that market. So we need to make sure that people are equipped for the jobs that are here right now available in Kansas. So I'm very proud of the Farm Bill. Of course, it's kind of turned into a little bit of a political battle. And Senator Stabenow, is from Michigan, I believe, basically said a month ago she had no intention of getting the Farm Bill passed until after the election. She happens to think that we're going to flip the Senate, flip the House, and she could write a little bit different Farm Bill. But regardless, I'm committed to getting that done by the end of the year and think that we can find a path forward. The second thing to go back to, the second promise, was to talk about military security, national security. All those things to me go in one bunch together. I think it's very important we secure our southern border, certainly standing right beside President Trump, thinking that that's a priority. And I look forward to supporting Kevin McCarthy's bill, which he recently introduced, that was done in conjunction with the president to secure that southern border, to secure all our borders for that matter, and that it's a national security issue first and foremost. I don't think people understand that the opioid crisis, that so many of those opioids are coming across that border. A lot of those opioids are made in China. Fentanyl is now a synthetic drug that's 100 times more powerful than the opium drugs. And most of those are being smuggled across the southern border. I had no idea the human trafficking. I would have just never believed how much human trafficking could be going on across that border. So one more reason we need to do it, let alone just trying to keep putting an end to the gang members coming across, all those types of things as well. So national security, President Obama spent about $500 billion a year on the national defense. We're spending about $700 billion. So we're having to make up for lost time. It's a lot of money, and we'll talk about money here in a second as well. It's a lot of money, but first and foremost, our national security is a priority for this president and this Congress. Very proud to give the troops the most significant raise that they've had in a decade. Very proud that we've increased funding for our veterans as well, maybe to the tune of 50% over the past 6 years, a big chunk of it these last 2 years as well. And then, finally to talk about the economy, it's hard to talk much more about the economy. I can say how great it is, but also realizing that rural America is still struggling, and I've not fixed that yet. And that's why it's so important in a farm bill that there are significant dollars for the rural infrastructure. Across my state, across the district, we're seeing, the water tower at Jetmore is 110 years old now. So they're redoing their water system. So a lot of my community's water systems are aging out. High-speed internet is a huge priority. And of course, it's more costly to get it to rural America than it is where there's a large population of people to split up those infrastructure costs. So those are the three basic issues that were a priority to me. And now I might kind of turn to say, well, what's the future hold? What are my ambitions? What are my goals for these next 2 years? What do I think that we're going to prioritize? Number one, the thing that I still go to bed worried about is the national debt. I'm embarrassed to say what's happened with the national debt while I've been in Congress. Certainly that was a large priority to me. If there's any way I could have funded the military and not increase the social programs, that was my first, second, and third choice. But it became apparent that there was no way we could fund our military without giving my friends across the aisle and across the Capitol more money for social programs. So that's what we had to do. But as I think about fixing the problem, rather than resting just on blame, I want to start talking about solutions to the national debt. Like number one is we had to get this economy going again. A GDP of 3 or 4% versus 1 or 2% means literally hundreds of billion dollars of income to the federal government. So I knew that first, whether you think roads, bridges, education, the military is the most important, none of this happens without a strong economy, and I think that we've accomplished that. But then the next thing I have to do is figure out where can we start cutting expenses. The biggest cash item in the federal budget is health care. Health care now consumes 28% of the federal budget. That's totally unsustainable, and we'll maybe come back in a little bit and talk more about health care. But that's going to be the first thing that we're going to have to go after. Number two is basically we need a hiring freeze at the federal level, and I think President Trump is basically quietly doing that already, trying to shrink the size of federal government. As we roll back regulations, which we certainly have done, it takes less bureaucrats to take care of things in government as well. So rolling back regulations is a big piece of that. But what I'll really expect the president to do is to start trimming the budget, much like we all would in the private world, is maybe we turn it back 2% this year, and maybe it's 3% the next year, but we have to turn this big ship that we're on this seafood diet. We see food and we eat it. We need to cut back the spending diet that this country is on. But you know, the president gave us a budget like that. He gave us a 15% cut, and my emails, the phone calls I got, you would have thought that I was a horrible person, because everybody wants everybody else's program cut back but not their own. So there needs to be across the board cutting in our spending. It's going to take a very strong president to get that done, and hopefully that'll be one of his priorities going forward as well. Next priority to me I would talk a little bit about is the trade issues that we have going on. Very important to Wichita, Kansas, very important to everybody across the district, across the country. I'm sure you all realize that Mexico and Canada are by far and away our number 1 and 2 trade partners. We export 4 times more in dollars to those two countries, Canada and Mexico, than we do to China. Of course, we import $500 billion of products, so it's about $350 billion of products from China. But getting NAFTA done, and now the president's going to call it USMCA and never call it NAFTA in front of him again. I'd very much advise against that. He likes the term USMCA, and can't tell you how important that was to Kansas agriculture and also for your aerospace industry here. The industry that I know here in Wichita, when they're making a jet, making a new plane, the guts of that go back and forth across the border to Mexico 5, 6, 7 times. And it's almost impossible to stop that at every step of the way and figure out some type of a tax on that. So it's very important to Wichita and to Kansas to get that done. You know, looking forward, it's the opportunities before us. I think Japan could be very huge. Japan appears to be very ready to negotiate. Their economy is, gosh, 3 or 4 times the size of Canada and Mexico's put together. So there's a huge upside for Japan, very, very important for our United States beef to be exported too. So that's a very great opportunity. The European Union and Great Britain appear to be very anxious to negotiate something as well. And then we need to button up the rest of Southeast Asia. We've got some good inroads there with South Korea already. And of course, the $500 billion gorilla in the room is China. Let me say this about China. We cannot possibly keep doing what we've been doing. China is like a tick, like a leech that's just slowly sucking the blood out of the United States. And we cannot keep going down that path. We can't let them have a 25% tariff on us, but we only have a 2% tariff on them. However bad the intellectual property theft I thought is 10 times worse than that. They literally steal $500 billion of intellectual property from us every year. And then additionally, 90% of the counterfeits that come into this country come from China through Canada. So Canada just turns their head and takes their portion of that and then lets them bring them in across the border as well. So we can't keep doing what we've been doing. There's going to be some more blood spilled in the trade war that started in February when the president imposed a tariff on washing machines and solar panels. and China reciprocated by doing a lawsuit against us on sorghum, and we saw the price of sorghum drop $1 a bushel overnight. The tariffs have been especially hard on agriculture and manufacturing, and I understand that, but yet I've done my best to stand beside the president on his goals and objectives, realizing that we can't keep doing what we've been doing, or our grandchildren will be working for China. As we sat there and watch what's going on around us, China is trying to get into Mexico, get into Cuba, all these other countries, and basically one of their models is they loan you money to build, say, a new port in Mexico or a new port in Southeast Asia in exchange for ownership. And I can assure you, from a national security purposes, we don't want China owning half of Mexico, or let alone some of their natural resources. So I do think the president's got this right, that we have to stand up to this big bully and say enough is enough. And the great news is, when I get to explain this to American agriculture, they get it. They truly are been incredible patriots, despite all the blood loss that they've had through this past 6, 7, going on 9 months now. They've stood beside the president, and they've stood beside me on making good trade policy. We'll continue to be very instrumental, I think, in that. Kevin Brady is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, personally invited me to go to Mexico to help negotiate the NAFTA agriculture agreement, which turned out very, very good for Kansas dairy. A couple good things came out of that for us especially. So we'll stay very engaged in trade as we go forward. You know, what else could I talk about? I think infrastructure, immigration, and healthcare are still out there. On a infrastructure issue, I think President Trump, that was one of the few goals promises he made that he's not got to address. He wants to do it, but we don't have the money to do it right now. Each one of these hurricanes sucks 50, 75 billions of dollars out of our economy. So any money we had for infrastructure is being used for new infrastructure in those hurricane states. The fires in California, all those things have added up, I'm sure, well over 200, probably $300 billion. And all along, the infrastructure plan the president had was for the federal government to invest $250 billion, but then local and state municipalities, governments invest about 80% of the project, basically flipping it. Right now, most projects are done 80-20 with the federal government. The president wants to flip that. So I think it'll be real important that Kansas figure out what our priorities will be to get those federal matching dollars, so that we have dollars on the most important issues that we need fixed, and make sure that we're prioritizing those. Immigration, talk about that just for a second. Certainly national security is by far the most important issue. Nothing is going to happen, I can guarantee, until President Trump is comfortable with the border security. We fully support Kevin McCarthy's new legislation he has, which is calling for another $20 billion. We've already given the president about $5 billion. He wants another $20 billion to secure the borders. Part of that's is indeed a wall, part of it's more troops on the grounds, part of it's more technology. I'm going to let the experts figure out the best way to secure the border, but I think we all acknowledge that that's a priority. Beyond that, we have 70,000 agriculture jobs that depend upon a guest worker visa. And I'm working very hard to get some type of legislation that would fix that problem. I'm looking at long-term solutions that are fair for all concerned, that prioritize those people who can take care of themselves and their families. Certainly if you're willing to work hard and you can tolerate the Kansas heat, the Kansas cold, we've got jobs for you in those industries as well. So immigration will continue to be a priority. Lastly, I'll talk about health care and open it up. Gosh, I could talk the rest of the afternoon about health care. The true problem with health care is the cost of health care. It's the cost of health care. Everyone wants to talk about coverage. Pre-existing conditions is a given to me. We have to protect people with pre-existing conditions, but we have to go after the cost of health care. All the legislation that we're working on, I ask my staff 3 things. It has to do one of these 3 things. It has to either increase transparency, provide and allow for more innovation, or make patients into consumers again. So transparency, innovation, and consumerism. So transparency to me means when you go to a restaurant, you get to look at the menu and you have prices. When you go to get your hip replaced at a local hospital, you'll get your cost, your bill about 3 months later, Medicare, Blue Cross pay about half of what the bill was. Anyway, it's a big black box that no one understands. So we need to make that world entirely transparent. One of the other big issues is going on. The president's very concerned about pharmacy costs. There's a lack of transparency in pharmacy right now. There's something called pharmacy benefit managers. There's 4 of them. They control about 90% of the market, and they take about a third of that dollar that you're giving the pharmacy. Those pharmacy benefit managers take about a third of that dollar out, and they're given invisible kickbacks to insurance companies, to big pharma, and I want those to become transparent as well. If there's kickbacks going on, and they're legal, unfortunately, Congress made these legal in 2004. It's the only industry in the country that allows a legal kickback. So I think if the American consumer sees this happening, there'll be enough screaming that the pharmacy costs will start coming down. Innovation can do more to drive the cost of healthcare down than any legislation that I can write, whether it's vaccines to prevent cancer, vaccines to prevent viruses, whether it's allowing us to do outpatient joint procedures. There's lots of innovation that's happening, but the federal government continues to get in the way. I'll make a couple good pitches for this administration. We approved more generic drugs in the past year than the previous 4 years under President Obama. Let me say that again. We approved more generic drugs in the last year than the 4 years of Obama. So that whole process, this president gets it. Seema Verma gets it at CMS. The FDA folks get it as well. They're starting to understand the opportunities there. Maybe share too quickly things I'm really proud of in healthcare. One of them is the 21st Century Cares Act that we funded. This is our funding to our moonshot to cure cancer, to cure things like Alzheimer's. So we have prioritized that funding and feel just incredible things are happening at the National Science Foundation, NIH, to cure those diseases. And again, that's going to drive the cost of healthcare down. One I'm really proud of, and the president's proud of too, is the Right to Try Act. When a new medicine goes through the FDA, it's typically a 10-year process. After phase 1, the Right to Try Act is going to let, if you have a terminal illness, we'll let you try that medicine after it's only been through phase 1 trials. So it's going to give drugs about 5 to 7 years to have a head start. We haven't really been able to test the entire safety of that drug. It might often take 8 or 9 or 10 years to see some of the side effects. But if you're a person that has no other alternatives, you're willing to take on some of that risk. And having passed phase 1 is still a pretty good hill for people to get over. So those are a couple things happening in healthcare. There's also other things that we have done that no one's talking about that is driving the cost of healthcare down. We repealed the individual mandate. That was costing about 8 million Americans $2,000 a year. So that is now gone. Thanks to working with the president, he's going to allow short-term policies. So these short-term policies are about 30 to 70% the cost of the Obamacare compliant health care. And they are skinny policies, but my vision is let the consumer decide what they want. If they want a short-term policy that's basically a catastrophic policy and has half the cost, that's better than doing nothing. Another thing I'm excited about is allowing associations to form groups to sell health care. So somebody like Farm Bureau could offer all of their members some type of an insurance product. So I think there are some good things happening. It looks like healthcare prices have certainly stabilized under this president. We're only going to go up like 3 or 5% this year. So some steps in the right direction, a lot more to do. Maybe I'll stop there and try to take some questions and give you the best answers I can.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Marshall, for coming on over here.
Oh, there you go.
So there's got a whole slew of questions, and we'll see how many we can get to.
Okay.
Just a reminder, keep your question as brief as possible so we can get to as many of them as possible.
And I'll try to give you short answers too. I'm going to give you the 1 or 2 minute version rather than the 20-minute version so we can get through them.
Thank you again for being here, Dr. Marshall. You kind of made a comments about the national debt and the budget. Would you expand? I consider the national debt, like you said, a great embarrassment. We're going to collapse financially if we don't start dealing with it.
Yeah, I think the next thing I would talk about, which I didn't mention yet, is that 2/3 of the federal budget is spent without me getting to vote on it. Okay, only about 1/3 of it do I get to vote on each year. So somewhere we have to go after what's called the mandatory spending part of this. Whether it's Medicaid, we have to figure out how are we going to save Medicare, because it's going to run out of money in 8 or 10 years. So we have some really tough decisions to make. I don't think it's practical to think that I'm going to get Medicare and Social Security at age 65 or 67. People are living so much longer. So we have to do more than just go after the discretionary spending as well.
Last week we had a CEO from the Newton, Kansas hospital up there that answered this question, and this is Brother Burrell, doctor. What happened to the rural hospitals out in the country? Financial straits, it just boom, boom happened the last couple of years. What's the problem?
Sure. You know, I think a hospital is a direct reflection of their local economy. So many of the counties in my district have half the number of people that were in them 20 years ago. It doesn't take nearly as many people to do it. And a lot of that, so there's just less economy, less financial support for them as well. So I think that's the biggest issue, is just that it's another reflex of what the local economy is going on. Number two, a lack of physicians and nurses that are willing to go to those areas. I was literally on call every day or every other day for 25 years. And my wife, she was at the point to say, enough, you know, we can't keep doing this. So it takes people, you look at there are some rural hospitals that are doing great. It always starts with good people, good doctors and good nurses, and then some type of local strong economy. But also, for decades, hospitals have lived off this cost-plus mentality. They've always been able to just bill the government, Medicare, whatever their costs were, plus a percentage. And I'm not sure how many people have built a house here on a cost-plus basis, but it usually turns into being a pretty expensive endeavor when they start making your change orders. So I think that hospitals today have to become leaner and more efficient. The number of hospital administrators has doubled per hospital over the past 10 years. So I think we need to make sure we're investing money on doctors and nurses, not on more administrators. And part of that's the fault of the federal government. Better go on.
Thank you, Congressman, for being here, and I look forward to voting for you November 6th, and I hope that we can remain red here in Kansas all the way through. My question is, before we had a constitutional republic, this is less policy and more philosophy, or even a king, we had the family unit, and it seems like in the past few decades that there's been people trying to break that family unit down. Can you speak just a little bit on that and how important that is to keeping our republic alive? Thank you.
Yeah. You know, certainly I don't think this is a challenge that Washington's going to fix. I think it starts in our own families, our own communities, having dinner together, putting our phones down, all those types of things. I'm just going to keep looking in the mirror and say, what can we do to keep our families together? Faith, family, community, all priorities for me.
Over here. Thanks for being here, Dr. Marshall. You talked a little bit about the broadband in rural communities, and I know there was a time a century ago when they didn't have electrification, and that seemed to be solved pretty effectively. I wonder if you've looked into that, or if there's any move to look at that.
Yeah, absolutely big priority. So my mom was raised on a dead-end street. She didn't get electricity until she was in 8th grade, and I still remember being on the party line and listening for her parents' ring was the two short rings as well. So I get it. So it's exactly the same challenges. There's something called a universal fee, UFO or something like that, at everyone's phone bill we get each month. And those dollars are supposed to be utilized for the lesser served areas. So I think that my job right now is to make sure that we spend those monies in the places where they need them most and not duplicate them. Part of the Obama stimulus was to help solve this problem, but instead a lot of the money was used to go out and have duplicative services to people that already had high-speed internet. So right now they're making the official map, or where is it underserved, where do we need to fill in the holes. Of course the map doesn't look really accurate compared to what most of my people are saying, so we're going back to try to iron that out. And again, just literally allotting some money in the farm bill to solve some of those problems.
Over here.
Sorry, could you bring us up to speed on where, I know the Senate's passed some non-binding stuff on industrial hemp production in the United States?
Okay, sure. So on the Senate Farm Bill, they did pass industrial hemp, and Senator McConnell is from Kentucky, and they've been one of the leaders, one of the pilot programs. It was not in the House version. It is a matter of discussion, and I do support it. I do support the industrial hemp, which is not marijuana, which cannot be used as a hallucinogenic. It would be really hard to get high on hemp. It would make you sick. You would throw up and puke before that could happen. So it doesn't take much water. I think it is a crop that my Kansas farmers could use. And I've encouraged our chairman to seriously consider it and go along with the Senate. Like I said earlier, some things in the Senate bill I thought were better for Kansas, and that would be one of them. So it's in committee.
Very good.
And you're a doctor. Would you define the health care that you feel the public is responsible for? I mean, is it giving a person 2 aspirins, or is it giving everybody presidential health care? What do you feel the public's responsibility is in defining health care for the individual?
Wow. You know, I think that health care is not unlike everything else in America. I think that we're consumers, and if I give the American consumer choices, they'll figure out what's best for them. So I think it's all the consumer's responsibility. At the same time, I do feel an obligation to help the poor, the needy, widows and children as well. So I think whatever this spectrum is, or this gauge of more government versus less government, more self-responsibility, I'm going to keep pushing it back to the self-responsibility. If I answered your question, but that would be, I'm trying to.
Well, everybody says health care, but everybody says health care, but nobody tells us what health care is.
Okay. Well, I think that to your point, having Medicaid is not access to health care. So one of the big issues that we've been debating is everyone should have access to health care, and they would say, oh, you do Medicaid expansion and more people will have coverage, but they don't have more access. When half of the physicians don't accept Medicaid, that's not access to care. So to me, you know, health care is getting to go to the physician you want to go to, getting to choose a hospital you want to go to. Let those healthcare providers compete for your business, much like everybody else does. And then, you know, it's between you and your doctor to define what health care is for the most part, I think, for your relationship to determine what you want. It's my job as a physician to give you options and give you advice, but I think it's the sanctity of that physician-patient relationship is certainly holy to me.
You and our senators were very instrumental in keeping Amtrak serving this state, and I want to thank you for that. But they've only extended for a year, and this infrastructure thing also applies to moving people as well as goods. What are some of your visionary plans for improving infrastructure in Kansas?
Yeah. You know, one of the big issues with the Amtrak from here to essentially to California is that Kansas committed some funds and we did some infrastructure here. Colorado did, but then New Mexico reneged. So part of my vision is holding New Mexico accountable, and if Kansas has invested in this plan, we need them to invest in it as well. So number one is putting some political pressure on New Mexico to do their fair share of the bargain. You know, infrastructure to me, you know, the roads and bridges certainly are the worst shape that I've ever seen. I think we have to prioritize them. You know, I think I've sat down with some of your leadership from here, and they've identified the exchange going north out of town where it splits to go to Salina, El Dorado, and that may be the worst mess I've ever seen in my life. And I've lived it. You know, I mean, I've driven that highway for my entire life. So I think it's, you know, prioritizing, and then eventually we have to start to talk about is how to pay for it as well.
Thank you for being here, Dr. Marshall. You mentioned very briefly prescription benefit managers, and you also used the word transparency a little while back. Is there any chance you could expand just a little bit on what PBMs do and how untransparent they are in the prescription world?
Okay. I think number one is what they don't do. I don't see that pharmacy benefit managers improve healthcare in any way, shape, or form. I would look at them almost like a wholesaler, where there's only 4 wholesalers in the entire country now. So they're directly purchasing the drugs from Big Pharma, and then they're selling them to local pharmacies or hospitals. The hospitals, they use a GPO, a group purchasing organization, more so. So the problem is there's little competition. There's only 4 of them controlling the entire market. And for the life of me, I can't figure out what they do other than extract about 1/3 of the dollars and give these invisible kickbacks. They would tell you, they would come to Blue Cross and say, you should contract with us because we can drive your prices down, because they can go get Tylenol and ampicillin cheaper than you can get it yourself. But I think that they direct and push people to more expensive medicines rather than the generics, for instance. So they have, whatever the system is set up, it's sending more dollars back to big pharma. You know, and even the president, one of the things he just did, gosh, was it just yesterday, that he said that your pharmacist can now tell you when you're sitting there buying the non-generic drug that there's a generic that's less expensive. So before, the pharmacist was not able to tell you that. There's something called a clawback, which I still don't understand. That somehow, when the pharmacist, my local pharmacist, sells you that prescription, months later, these pharmacy benefit managers can claw back even more of that money. So my local pharmacist is getting squeezed out very quickly. And then the latest concern is these pharmacy benefit managers actually owning the retail pharmacies as well, that there's even more consolidation of the industry going on.
Right here.
On Medicare and Social Security, we've got 11 million people under age 65 on those, and I know they only have to have a physical disability. Any solution to this problem?
Yeah. So certainly the number of people with disabilities has increased exponentially. I think it'll be working with SEMA, Verma, with CMS, trying to say, how do we make this a little tighter? But I also think it goes back to one of the basic problems with the cost of health care is Americans don't like to get out and walk or do much anymore. So again, how do we make it to be in vogue to put your IT system down, put your phone down and go walk for 20 or 30 minutes? Obesity is really contributing to all the disabilities as well as health care. And I'm much more concerned about activity than I am whether you have dessert or not today. I think that what we need people out is up and moving, and I think it's well proven now that exercise is more important than your cholesterol, your percent body fat. So how do we do that? What can we do? Do we make, we're making a war on drugs, we made a war on cigarettes. In my conversations with the Surgeon General, that's what I proposed to him is how do we make this activity, physical activity, is as important as not smoking. So that would be kind of my vision, because I don't think the federal government's going to fix it. But we do need to raise the bar. We need to get people up and moving and maybe teach them a little bit better about nutrition.
Right over here.
Doctor, back to the tariffs for a minute. Do I understand correctly that President Trump threw $25 billion into the pot to address the short-term problem that farmers would have, and that was meant to be short-term, that long-term it was going to somehow work out? Can you address that?
Right. So it was actually $13 billion. So certainly the American agriculture always bears the blunt, is the tip of the spear when it comes to retaliations on tariffs. So American agriculture has certainly suffered immensely. The president offered this to agriculture, gosh, back in May or June, and the president would tell the stories. American agriculture said, no thanks. We just want access to markets, get NAFTA done. 3 months later, NAFTA still wasn't done. People were bleeding, so the president indeed has had the $13 billion subsidies. They've already awarded about half of those, and they're going to wait till December to decide if the other half needs to be used or not. But it's not going to be a long-term solution. I don't think I know nobody's getting rich off of it. If anything, I would describe it as maybe they'll be able to plant next year's crops on it. 4 years in a row of horrible agriculture prices. A lot of our banks are in pretty tough shape out west as well. So it is tough times with agriculture. So it's $13 billion, and they've allotted half of it now.
Dr. Marshall, thank you for being here today. Could you tell us a little bit about how the administration is going to deal with the invasion from the south?
Yeah. You know, I don't know that I have much more knowledge than you all do, but I certainly have faith in President Trump that you should take everything he says seriously, maybe not literally, but take it seriously. And I'm afraid 800 troops isn't enough. If 5 or 15,000 people are approaching us, I think we need 10 or 20,000 troops to say, don't come in here. So I'm just going to have to count on the president to do what we've asked him to do, and that's secure our country, whatever it takes. Certainly, I hope there's certainly a humane way to do it. I hope no one gets hurt. But once they do cross if they put a foot in our territory, they can apply for asylum. So there's literally thousands of people applying for asylum every day. If you come I went and visited the southern border just to try to get a better feel of it myself, and literally you cross the border, you ask for asylum. It might take 30 or 90 days till we have enough judges to hear your case. So we set them free and say, come back in 30 days or 60 days, and most of them never show back up for that appointment. So it's a big challenge.
I think I'm going to slide my question in here. When we heard Congressman Estes speak, he explained that one of the big challenges we have in controlling spending is this omnibus bill. Yeah. Instead of these individual spending bills that are supposed to occur. Is there any way to get back to the way things should be handled?
Well, certainly, Ron and I have suggested that many times to leadership. And it just seems, so far it's been impractical. So what happens is we'd like to do, there's 12 buckets we have to fund each year, 12 buckets of medicine and of money, and one of them is defense. So the only way I can get 60 votes on the Senate is if I take another bucket for social programs and put it at the same time. I'll say this much. We funded 7 of those buckets already. They were 2 or 3 buckets together rather than 12 of them together. So we've made progress, but we have a long ways to go. One of the solutions I proposed to administration or to our leadership is to do a budget for 2 years and appropriate for 2 years in non-election years. And I think that we would get more done and having a 2-year plan.
Raise a thought, and that since you're in D.C. and bring this forward. I'm not an attorney and just pretended to be one for a short period of time. And I thought about this on the border is why doesn't the president, along a swath, the entire border with what's going on with the mob coming up, declare martial law and suspend the writ of habeas corpus for people immigrating. In that manner, there is no judicial review in a martial law, and he can suspend the writ of habeas corpus, and then they can simply process them there. We don't have to wait for a judge in that and simply process them and send them back home.
Okay. And again, I'm not the micromanager, but to tell the president exactly how to do this. I stick with goals and objectives, but I'll make one quick comment. Dealing with refugees is different than an immigration plan. And this is a situation of 15,000 refugees coming across the border at the same time. So the policy for that's going to be different than the day-to-day, week-to-week agriculture visas that I'm talking about. And I think that some of the things I've seen the president considering would be something like you're talking about. I don't have an exact explanation. I'm just going to have to trust him that he'll do the right thing.
We have had the program here at least once, Dr. Josh Ember of the concierge medicine.
Yeah.
And interesting, he talks about the pill that you might spend $1 for at the pharmacy, he can dispense it for 10 cents. That's interesting. That's an interesting example of maybe savings. What do you think about trying to move towards concierge medicine as a solution for healthcare?
Absolutely. So when I talk about innovation, this is one of the innovative things that could happen if we would get government out of the way to do it. And so one of my solutions to deal with people in the individual market, so people who don't get their health care through Medicare, Medicaid, or through their employer, they would all go into one pool. And within that pool of people, about 5% of people spend 50% of the healthcare dollars. Now, I don't know who it's going to be in this room, but 5% of us over the next year are going to spend 50% of the total healthcare dollars. So my vision is to take those people and let someone like Josh manage their care so that we're not duplicating services, so we're not getting 5 CAT scans in 1 week, all those things. So I'm a huge fan of it. The only companies that I know of that have not had increased healthcare costs. The past 3 to 5 years, I went to a concierge doctor. Even our Medicaid population, typically our Medicaid population is some of the highest utilizers of health care. If in my emergency room in Great Bend, we'd see 40 people a day. 10 of them would be Medicaid. 10 of them have no means to pay for the visit. About a fourth of them would be Medicare, and a fourth of them would be fully employed people with, you know, your gold policies. So I'm a big fan of them. We have to reward primary care more for what they're doing. We have to reward them for managing the care, getting out in front of it. So we probably have overvalued cardiac surgery, not to step anybody's toes, and undervalued primary care. So I'm a big fan of it. Now I got to figure out a way, working with Seema Verma, to implement it better. But we've had the same conversation. I'm part of Doc Caucus. There's 7 physicians in Congress. We have breakfast most every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. Nobody else is doing anything in DC at 7 a.m. except the doctors. And this is certainly one of the concepts that we've suggested to Seema that we would like to see her do.
Final, last, crassly political question. Dr. Nate Silvers, the New York Times political guru, says you're going to be in the minority next year in the U.S. House of Representatives. He also predicted President Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Do you agree or disagree, and why?
Yeah, I absolutely disagree. I think all of the numbers are trending in our direction. The president's popularity is going up significantly. All the generic ballots, the trend is in our direction. I don't think anybody knows. It certainly depends a lot on who's going to get out and vote or not. I mean, Ron and I are going to win. I think that's pretty well a given. Ron's in great shape. He's been a great friend there with me in Congress. Kevin Yoder's in the fight of his life right now. We were helping him out yesterday, and Steve Watkins up in Lynn's seat as well. So I'm still betting on us. I'm betting on us. I wouldn't bet the entire mortgage. I think if the generic ballot has us down by 6, the day of election, we win. Back in 2016, the generic ballot had Trump down by 6 points, and we still kept the majority. So I'm still betting on us.
Congressman Roger Marshall.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.